Well, I think at the Chicago summit recently, NATO took three key political decisions, even if details have to follow, but you have to start with the main political commitment. The first one is to make sure that we organise properly the progressive withdrawal of ISAF between now and 2014, so that we use the time, even while the troops are withdrawing, as productively as possible to assist the Afghans, transfer authority to them. That's starting. As you know, in Chicago, we heard that President Karzai is now taking over responsibility for 75% of the Afghan population. That will become 100% by the end of 2014. And that we, of course, keep our combat capability, even while we're transitioning out, to be able to deal with the Taliban. So that when the ISAF mission does come to an end, the Afghans are in the strongest possible position thereafter to take over in the long run. So that's the first thing, a structured process of withdrawal, but keeping a core element there to the very end. Second major decision is to agree that we will continue to train the Afghan army and the Afghan security forces after 2014. So in other words, NATO is not withdrawing from Afghanistan, despite the popular perception sometimes. There'll be a long-term mission, a training mission, a mentoring mission for the Afghans afterwards. We've still got to figure out how big it's going to be, how many people it's going to involve, where the training is going to take place, but the political commitment to stay on was there. The third thing is that we agreed that we're going to have to, at least initially, fund most of the cost of those Afghan security forces. You saw, like I did, an estimate of just over $4 billion. And although it's true we haven't yet signed up all of the various commitments of allies and partners, at least nations in Chicago made the political commitment that they will assume that funding burden until such time as, obviously, with the development of the Afghan economy, the Afghans themselves can take over that financing. Well, these are what I suppose in the United States people call homeland defense issues. They're threats to the well-being of our populations, they're threats to our critical infrastructure, they're threats to our economic way of life, to our communication routes, the sort of things that don't necessarily kill people, but which can really disrupt their lives in a major way, like energy cut-offs or a paralyzing cyber attack, such as the one that Estonia suffered in 2007. That you might want to call these weapons of mass disruption rather than mass destruction. But even after NATO has left Afghanistan, these challenges will be with us for most of the 21st century. And therefore what NATO wants to do is to make sure that we have responses to those challenges, that we keep them within manageable proportions, and that gradually we figure out international ways, cooperating together, to deal with issues like the 140 million cyber attacks that take place every day, or our vulnerability of critical infrastructure, for example, to terrorist attacks or to disruption through natural disasters, or the continuing existence in many parts of the world of terrorist groups with increased access to weapons and finance and so on. NATO has neglected somewhat these challenges in the past, and what happened not at Chicago, but the previous NATO summit in Lisbon in 2010 was that we adopted a new strategic concept where we put these challenges front and center and decided that NATO, yes, has to protect its populations against conventional threats, the ones we were used to during the Cold War, the ones that come in the shape of tanks or nuclear weapons or big armies crossing territories, crossing borders, seizing territory. But there's another aspect to collective defense and collective security, which is to protect our populations against these new challenges as well. Well, I think for me, smart defense is two things. The first thing is that if you look at what, for example, the European allies spend today on defence, it's still nearly 200 billion euros a year. Now that's not obviously quite on par with the United States budget, even though that's going down, but it's still far higher than Russia, China combined, many other countries in the world combined. It's still quite a lot of money. But when you look at the actual output that Europe gets for that, then of course it's a rather depressing story. For example, 95% of all European forces, even today, are still nationally owned, nationally constituted. Europe has 1.7 million soldiers on the books, but is hard pressed to deploy 100,000 of those at any one time. So what's happening to the others? There's still a lot of duplication. For example, in Europe, we have 16 major shipyards. US, you only have 6 these days. We have 4 different jet fighter programs. US, you only have 1 these days. I could go on. So smart defense, first of all, is spending this money in a more productive way, less maybe on personnel in future, less on manpower or soldiers, more in investment, modernization, in precision-guided munitions, intelligence, surveillance, the kind of things that were clearly very lacking on the European side during the recent Libya operation. So in other words, shifting the burden of defence from sort of current expenditure on things that we don't need, Cold War legacy things that we can't deploy, and increasingly into new technologies and making our forces more deployable. Second aspect of smart defence is that there are groupings of countries in Europe which are very like-minded or similar in size, similar in geography. You know, the UK, France, both nuclear powers, both with aircraft carriers, both with drone programs. So why continue to duplicate? Why not put these together? Or groups in Central Europe, the Benelux countries, groups in Northern Europe, again, like-minded, same needs. So to the extent that these regional groupings can start pooling and sharing resources or specialising, we should be able to get, for the same amount of money, far more capabilities. But of course the trick is not simply to announce the intention to do this, but to actually find a way in NATO of implementing it in the long run. And there are, of course, some significant obstacles, we have to be honest. There's still very much a national culture of protecting sovereignty. I want my ship because I know I can use it whenever I like, and if I pool it with somebody else, how am I certain that that partner will be willing to come with me on an operation? So we have to build trust in the alliance about pooling and sharing. Second thing, if you have role specialisation, how do we make sure that people do the demanding things and don't just take the easy things? And so that's the second thing. Thirdly, what in smart defence is going to be the burden of national effort? You know, you have to, if not spend more, at least stabilise your defence budget. You have to make an effort vis-a-vis, let's pool the money, and therefore I depend upon others funding my programme. So we've got to find a balance here, because of course if the message goes out that, for example, the big European countries are going to fund the defence of the small European countries through smart defence, I'm not sure that this is really what they would see as an optimal outcome.